In the summer of 1927, parents across Rio de Janeiro stopped letting their children play in the streets after dark. A name whispered in terror had become synonymous with nightmares: Febrônio. Even today, nearly a century later, elderly Brazilians remember their grandparents warning them, "Behave or Febrônio will come for you." But who was this man who terrorized an entire city? And how did his case change the course of criminal justice in Brazil forever? This is the story of Febrônio Índio do Brasil, con artist, fraudulent doctor, and one of the most disturbing figures in South American criminal history. Our story begins not in the bustling streets of Rio, but in the rural valleys of Minas Gerais, in the heart of Brazil's interior. On January 14, 1895, a boy named Febrônio Ferreira de Matos was born in the small town of São Miguel do Jequitinhonha. He was the second of 14 children born to Teodoro Simões de Oliveira and Reginalda Ferreira de Matos. Teodoro was a farmer and former butcher who had a serious drinking problem. The household was marked by violence. Febrônio regularly witnessed his father beating his mother in drunken rages. At 12 years old, Febrônio made a decision that would set the course of his life. He ran away from home with a traveling salesman, leaving behind his large family and the brutality of his childhood. He was completely illiterate at the time. The boy eventually made his way to the town of Diamantina, where he learned to read and write. He worked odd jobs, shining shoes, serving as a houseboy, working in kitchens. In 1909, at just 14 years old, Febrônio arrived in Rio de Janeiro, the capital of Brazil at the time. But the bright lights of the big city didn't lead to opportunity. Instead, Febrônio began a descent into a life of petty crime. Between 1916 and 1929, he racked up an astonishing 37 police records: fraud, theft, blackmail, vagrancy. Febrônio cycled through the justice system again and again. He used multiple aliases, including Pedro de Souza, constantly reinventing himself to stay one step ahead of the law. Then, in 1920, something happened that would transform Febrônio from a simple con man into something far more dangerous. While imprisoned at the Colônia dos Rios on Ilha Grande, an island prison off the coast of Rio, Febrônio claimed he experienced a divine revelation. According to him, a blonde woman appeared to him in a vision and declared him the son of light. This vision commanded him to tattoo young men and boys with specific letters, DCVXVI. Febrônio interpreted these as standing for God, Charity, Virtue, Sanctity, Life, Magnet of Life in Portuguese. He began calling himself Índio do Brasil, Indian of Brazil, adding a mystical indigenous element to his increasingly delusional persona. In 1926, he even published a book titled Revelations of the Prince of Fire. Those who read it describe the content as confused, dreamlike, and deeply disturbing. It was the manifesto of a man losing touch with reality. But Febrônio's delusions didn't stop him from being calculating. In fact, his ability to deceive would prove deadly. In 1921, he established what he called a medical cooperative in Rio, called the Medical Helper. He partnered with an actual dentist named Bruno Ferreira Gabina. The following year, Febrônio managed to steal or copy Gabina's dental diploma and opened his own dental practice in downtown Rio. Imagine going to the dentist with a simple toothache, only to have a complete fraud extract healthy teeth and prescribe strong alcohol as treatment. That was the nightmare Febrônio's patients faced, but it gets worse. In 1925, he moved to Bahia, now calling himself Dr. Febrônio Simões de Melo Índio do Brasil. From there he traveled to Espírito Santo, operating under yet another false name, Dr. Uzeda Filho. Posing as a doctor, Febrônio caused the deaths of 2 children and a woman during childbirth through sheer incompetence and medical malpractice. When suspicions arose, he simply moved to the next state and assumed a new identity. His pattern was always the same: set up a fake medical practice, sometimes converting it into a fraudulent employment agency. He'd make promises, jobs, opportunities, medical care, and instead delivered exploitation and harm. The real Dr. Bruno Ferreira Gabina, whose identity Febrônio had stolen. His whereabouts were never discovered. To this day, no one knows what happened to him. By early 1927, Febrônio's crimes were escalating from fraud and malpractice to something far darker: January 1927. Febrônio found himself once again behind bars, this time in the 4th Auxiliary Police Station in Rio de Janeiro. In his cell, he targeted 2 fellow inmates, forcing himself on them. When he attempted the same with a 3rd cellmate named Jalma Rosa, the man fought back. Febrônio beat him to death. But the truly shocking incident came on February 21, 1927. Police discovered Febrônio on Corcovado Mountain, the same mountain where the Christ the Redeemer statue now stands, completely unclothed and painted yellow. He had a child tied to him and was in the process of cooking a human skull over a fire. He was immediately taken to the National Hospital for the Insane and evaluated by Dr. Juliano Moreira, one of Brazil's most prominent psychiatrists. Despite clear signs of severe mental illness, Febrônio was eventually released. That release would prove catastrophic. In April, shortly after his discharge, Febrônio encountered 2 17-year-old boys named Jacob Edwin and Otávio de Bernardi. He lured them with promises of employment, then tattooed them with his mystical symbols and assaulted them. Both survived and escaped, but others wouldn't be so fortunate. August 13, 1927, 20-year-old Almiro José Ribeiro disappeared after going with Febrônio, who had promised him a job. Almiro's family trusted the seemingly respectable doctor. 2 days later, on August 15th, Almiro's body was discovered. He had been strangled with a green vine. His body bore the tattooed letters, DCVXVI. That same August day, Febrônio tattooed a 16-year-old boy named Joaquim, who managed to escape before being harmed further. But on August 29th, Febrônio struck again. 10-year-old João Ferreira, known as Johoca, was lured away from his parents with the promise of a new suit of clothes. Like Almiro before him, the boy was tattooed, assaulted, and strangled. His small body wasn't found until September 7th. Febrônio also attacked an unsuspecting tailor, pretending to provide medical treatment before slashing the man's neck with a knife. Miraculously, the tailor survived. Rio de Janeiro was in panic. Parents locked their doors. Children were kept inside. The press published daily updates, mixing facts with sensationalism, turning Febrônio into a mythical monster. On August 31, 1927, witnesses and family members of the victims finally identified Febrônio, and he was arrested.
Bom dia, povo carioca. Aqui falando a Rádio Sociedade do Rio de Janeiro, uma notícia que vai tranquilizar a população. A polícia finalmente prendeu o acelerado Febrônio Índio do Brasil, autor do hediondo crime da Ilha do Ribeiro. O tarado tinha no peito uma tatuagem.
On September 19, 1927, the public prosecutor formally charged Febrônio with 2 counts of qualified homicide. There were many other suspected crimes, but authorities couldn't gather sufficient evidence for additional charges. What happened next would make legal history in Brazil. Dr. Heitor Pereira Carrilho, a leading forensic psychiatrist, conducted an extensive evaluation. His findings were groundbreaking for the time. Carrilho's report concluded that Febrônio suffered from constitutional psychopathy with sadistic impulses and mystical delusional ideas. In modern terms, he likely suffered from a severe psychotic disorder combined with antisocial personality traits. The crucial determination was this: Febrônio was incapable of normal use of his will. His capacity for criminal responsibility was either severely impaired or completely absent. The recommendation was unprecedented. Febrônio should be institutionalized ad vitam, Latin for life. In 1928, Febrônio faced trial before a jury presided over by Judge Ari de Azevedo. His defense attorney, Letácio Jansen, argued that his client was not guilty by reason of insanity. The court accepted the psychiatric evaluation. Febrônio became the first person in Brazilian legal history to be declared criminally insane and committed to a psychiatric facility as a security measure rather than being sent to prison. On June 6, 1929, Febrônio Índio do Brasil became the first patient admitted to the Rio de Janeiro Judicial Asylum, later renamed the Heitor Carrilho Institute in honor of the psychiatrist who evaluated him. The story doesn't end with Febrônio's institutionalization. In many ways, it becomes even stranger. On February 8, 1935, Febrônio attempted a daring escape. Using bedsheets tied together, he scaled the facility's 4-meter wall and made it over. Freedom was brief. He was recaptured the very next day at a friend's house. That escape attempt would be his last taste of the outside world. Febrônio remained institutionalized for 57 years. During his decades of confinement, his mental state continued to deteriorate. By the end, psychiatrists noted he had descended into complete dementia, lost entirely in his own fractured mind. On August 27, 1984, Febrônio died of pulmonary emphysema at the age of 89. He had spent more than half a century behind the walls of the asylum. The impact of Febrônio's crimes extended far beyond his victims and their families. For decades after his capture, Febrônio became Brazil's version of the boogeyman. Parents across the country used his name to frighten misbehaving children. Catholic churches reportedly refused to baptize babies with the name Febrônio. His case fundamentally changed Brazilian criminal justice. It established the legal framework for handling defendants with severe mental illness, creating the precedent that would shape forensic psychiatry in the country for generations. But Febrônio's story also raises uncomfortable questions that remain relevant today. What creates someone like Febrônio? Was it the brutal childhood, the neglect, the violence he witnessed? Was it mental illness that would have manifested regardless of circumstance? Or was it some combination of factors we still don't fully understand? How do we balance public safety with the reality that some individuals commit terrible acts while genuinely incapable of understanding their wrongness? And perhaps most troubling, how many potential victims might have been saved if Febrônio had received proper psychiatric intervention earlier instead of being released back onto the streets time and again? These questions don't have easy answers. What we do know is that behind the sensational newspaper headlines and the whispered warnings to children, there were real victims, young men and boys whose lives were cut short or forever altered by encounters with a deeply disturbed individual. The case files remain in Brazilian archives. The psychiatric evaluations are still studied in medical schools, and somewhere in the records of the Heitor Carrilho Institute, the documentation of Brazil's first forensic psychiatric patient gathers dust, a reminder of how one man's descent into madness changed an entire nation's approach to criminal justice. The name Febrônio may have faded from daily conversation, but his impact on Brazilian law, psychiatry, and culture endures. Some mysteries of the human mind remain unsolved. Some darkness defies complete understanding, and that perhaps is the most unsettling truth of all.
Nasci em Belo Horizonte, estado de Minas.
Como é que você veio parar aqui? O que você veio fazer aqui?
Aqui eu estou esperando o pai cozinheiro, que ele não sabe se fica aqui ou lá em Petrolina. Está olhando qual é a cidade mais aceitável. Se é ficar aqui, fornecendo aqui, ou fornecer comida lá em Petrolina.
Você trabalhava em que antes de vir para cá?
Trabalha no quarteirão. Tem um gabinete de dentista também, mas tem a farmácia.
Você tem diploma?
Eu tenho. Eu fiz a faculdade de farmácia e odontologia. Fundei a farmácia.
O que significam essas letras que tem tatuado no seu peito?
Eis o fim da luz. Estou explicando que eu sou crente da luz. Um dos crentes da luz. Que tem a minha estrela. Se tem a sua estrela, todos nós humanos temos uma estrela. Nasceu a pessoa e nasceu a estrela.
E quem é o filho da luz?
Um dos filhos da luz sou eu.
Você escreveu um livro, Febrônio?
É.
Como é o nome desse livro?
Revelação do Príncipe do Fogo.
E o que você escreve nesse livro?
É uma explicação que tem que dar de astrologia.
Me disseram uma vez que você tatuou umas crianças. Você já tatuou alguém?
Isso é mentira que pegaram. Amo, divina donzela, formosa estrela que ilumina o céu. Tu és o anjo que meus passos guia, és a harmonia dos encantos meus.